Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to have a chance to be part of this great webinar. Just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Shahana Alibhai. I always like putting up the slide because I think when I do introduce myself, yes, I'm a family doctor, but right now I'm 99.9% under the age of 5. They're a little bit older than what's in the picture there, but they still really are my full-time job. But my passion, I have to say, is public speaking. And somewhere along the way, what I enjoy speaking most about is really mental health. And if I had to sum it up in one word, it's stress. Maybe it's because I'm always trying to find ways that I myself can deal with stress and anxiety. But it's the most authentic topic for me to speak on, and I'm happy to speak with you today about it. This is the pyramid, I like to call it, the optimal health pyramid that I designed. And I think I designed this really out of frustration. I see so many patients in my office, and one of the difficult parts is that we have such a limited amount of time that we can spend with our patients. So a lot of the time, as you probably are all too familiar, when you see your family doctor, it's give me the symptom, jump to a diagnosis, come up with a treatment plan, typically involving medication, and you're out the door, typically within 7 to 10 minutes. But what happens often is that when I like to talk with my patients, I find out all of this other stuff. Talk about their family, their relationship, how they're sleeping, how they're coping at home, and even about their goals and dreams. So one day, actually, this is a true story, I just sat down, drew a triangle, and said, if I wanted to put everything I believe health was made up of, what would it be? And I came up with this. And the foundation for me, as it is for many of you, is our brains. It's our minds. It's healthy thinking, what I call thinking better. And probably the reason that this stuck with me most is because of that picture that I showed you just one slide previous. After the birth of my first son, Ishan, I suffered with postpartum anxiety, debilitating postpartum anxiety, in fact. And it took me almost a year to reach out and seek help. You know, saying those two sentences took me a year to actually say, and now I can say it with ease. But that took practice. That took recognition of the fact that I needed to take care of my mental health. And that's why it's on the foundation of our pyramid. Connecting deeply and building these strong relationships with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues is also there, because really you are the estimate of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So you better have strong, nurturing relationships if you are going to be your best self. When it comes to decisions, I really quantify your health as a decision that you make every single day. You know, health is not necessarily a goal. It's not necessarily a habit. It's one decision made after the other. So when it comes to the decisions you can make for your health, it's how do you eat? How do you rest? How do you move? And I just want to say for a moment, when it comes to resting, I don't necessarily just mean sleeping. I mean, how do you rest your brain? How do you relax? Do you escape? Do you practice escapism? Do you turn on the TV, open that bottle of wine? Not to say that that's not a bad thing, but do you actually confront your emotions? Do you have time to process them? Or are you always putting blinders on? So how do you rest in the spaces within your mind? And last but not least is this idea of impact. I think this thing that binds us as humans together to feel like, why are we here? What are we doing? What is our purpose? It doesn't have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be this aha moment. It just has to be something that maybe drives you. What do you live for? You know, I work with many teens who often have a lot of challenges with their mental health. And when I ask them, you know, what do you live for? A lot of them can give me an answer. You know, they live for their little sister. They live for the fact that they want to be a social worker and help another youth who's going through the same problems. So it doesn't matter how old you are. A lot of us, if we dig deep inside of us, we know there is that shining light. So the reason I mention this is because here we are in this world right now, March 2020, April 2020, And in comes COVID. And COVID represents this feeling of loss for so many of us because it stripped us away from our normal daily habits and routines. And more than anything, with social distancing especially, it's taken away that idea of connecting deeply with others. And we just say, okay, stay home, keep your social distance. But of course, us as humans, we crave that social interaction more than anything. And isolation and loneliness were already at its all-time high before COVID struck. How do I tell a youth now that is feeling so isolated, perhaps even suicidal, that you need to isolate, right? We can't do that in those types of terms. So when I put the COVID on this pyramid, I blocked out connecting deeply, although there are many ways that we can still fortunately connect through social media. But I want to show that there are so many other levels on this pyramid that COVID can never take away from us. It can't take away our minds and how we process this. It can't take away our ability to rest smart, to meditate, to journal, to move. We're still allowed to go outside to get fresh air. And even our eating decisions, it can't influence that. And more than anything, it has actually, I think, strengthened a lot of people's contribution and purpose. We're seeing that amazing idea of the collective experience of going through a tragedy, but bringing out such amazing attributes in our fellow humans when we see these acts of kindness every day. So I show that there, that yes, we feel a loss for so many of the daily habit, rituals, and routines that we're used to going through in our day because COVID has shaken that up. But so many things, actually the most important, it can't take away from us. So I share this image to bring into context what I'm currently going through right now, or what my last week looked like. You know, COVID alone, life still happens. And for many of you watching, you still have daily difficulties that you're going through. It could be your health, it could be your marriages, it could be the health of your children. And that was the example for me. So my youngest, Rahel, is 8 months old. And over the last week, he became extremely ill. And of course, I've seen a lot of pediatric patients, but when it becomes your own child, I think you can become less objective. He became dehydrated from a lot of vomiting. He became lethargic and listless. And this morning, we actually took him to pediatrics to be assessed by the team there. So watching your child, who's only 8 months, slowly deteriorate over the course of a week brought in so much anxiety for me. But when I really dialed into what I was most anxious about, it was wearing this dual hat as a doctor and as a mother. Because as a mother, I needed to be there, you know, hands on deck, caring for him, nursing him, doing whatever, you know, all parents do. But as a doctor, there was that constant fear, that constant guilt of missing something. So it was that uncertainty that was killing me inside. And I recently heard something that really stuck with me, and it was around COVID. But it was the fact that when you pair fear, which COVID sets in all of us, with uncertainty, this idea that when is this going to end? Is this going to affect my family? Is someone going to die of COVID that I know? All of these different things, that fuels anxiety. So it's the uncertainty more than anything that is so toxic to us. Another job that I work at is I work at the Abbotsford Breast Health Clinic, where we are on the front lines of diagnosing breast cancer. Now you can imagine how much anxiety, how much fear goes into the diagnosis or the lead up to the diagnosis for breast cancer. But one of the things that's always struck with me is this, that when I break the news to the woman and their family that yes, her results have come back showing that it is a breast cancer, of course, that's very difficult to digest. And of course, there's tears and there's high emotion. But I would say 90% of the time, the woman or the family looks at me and they do this. Okay. Because the week to 10 days leading up to the results was all unknown, was all fear, was all uncertainty. And however difficult that diagnosis is to make, at least then we can have a plan. So what I'm trying to highlight is that it's uncertainty that is the toxic driver of anxiety. Anxiety doesn't have to present as panic attacks. It doesn't have to present as someone saying, I feel really anxious. It can present in so many different ways. And now that you're in close quarters with your loved ones, you might see these different emotions coming up, and you probably recognize them in yourself. Fear, anger, overwhelm, guilt, irritability, apathy. You know, just me alone in the diagnosis or waiting for Rahel to hopefully get better, my 8-month-old, I felt so many of these things. And that's just a childhood illness. So remember, anxiety doesn't have to present as what we think of as typical, I just feel anxious. All of these things can be hallmarks for someone who's feeling very anxious. One of the things that I like to stress when I give this talk, and this is purely because I'm working on this myself, is what does it mean to be self-aware? So if I flip back for a second, even recognizing that you have any of these symptoms, fear, anger, overwhelm, that's a good step because you've recognized that in yourself. So many of us just drink the glass of wine or put on Netflix or do all of these things to cushion and band-aid ourselves without actually taking a step back to say, wait a second, like, how am I actually feeling? And if I had to put a word on it, what's that word? I'm scared. I'm overwhelmed. I feel really angry right now, whatever the case might be. That act in and of itself is self-awareness. And Dr. Brené Brown, who many of you probably have heard of, PhD, one of the most famous TED Talks out there. If you haven't watched her TED Talk on vulnerability, it's amazing. Just search Dr. Brené Brown. She says self-awareness is the developmental milestone of your middle age. And I love this. So just like we want our kids, I'm going through that right now, crawling and walking up the stairs and all these developmental milestones that we want our children to reach, between your 30s and your 50s or your 60s, the developmental milestone of middle age is self-awareness. That one thing, being able to label and identify your emotions. And the reason you do that is that you can see a pattern. So that you can see, well, every time I feel blank, I do blank. Every time I feel angry, I do whatever, you finish off that sentence. Every time I feel really scared, I tend to whatever that sentence might be, okay? And oftentimes it might not be you, it might be your partner that can recognize your own patterns. This all sounds very well and good, and it takes a lot of introspection and self-awareness to even understand what your patterns are. But there was a missing piece for me, right? To admit to someone, to admit to my husband, to admit to my family, to admit to my friends that I was even feeling depressed or guilty as a mom or any of those feelings that I had, that was really hard. And the reason it was hard is one word: acknowledgement. In order to become self-aware, you need someone that is trusted that will acknowledge how you're feeling. They don't need to say that what you're feeling is right. They don't need to concur with that emotion. They might actually disagree with how you're feeling, and that's okay. But they at least need to acknowledge how you're feeling. Because if I go to my husband and say, I feel like a really bad mom, I feel really guilty, he might just say, no, you're fine, you're fine. But if he takes a moment and says, oh, I hear you, it sounds like you're feeling really guilty, suddenly I can take a step back and say, yes, that is how I'm feeling. Because he or she, or whoever you want to open out to, has created a safe space. If we don't feel safe in acknowledging our emotions, we can never be self-aware. So finding someone, even yourself, that you are allowed to experience that emotion and not just have to autopilot fix it, is one of the key steps in being self-aware. Now here you are in close quarters with everyone. And I just told you on the foundation of the pyramid is that I want you to connect deeply with others. Well, one of the best ways that you can connect deeply with your spouse, with your family, with your friends, is to acknowledge them. But how do you acknowledge them? Let me teach you. When I was in medical school, this is, 4 years of undergraduate, 4 years of medical school, a few more years after that of training, probably one of the most important things that I ever learned were 3 words. They have nothing to do with a medicine. They have nothing to do with a diagnostic tool or criteria. But it was actually a communications class in first year medical school that we actually got to sit down with members of our community. And they would teach us how to talk best to patients because they were patients themselves. And there was an older woman that sat down with us. And she told us, she said, you know what, every time she sees her doctor, she just feels so heard. She feels so understood. And the reason she felt this way were because of 3 simple words. It sounds like. It sounds like you're feeling really tired today. It sounds like you haven't had much time for yourself. It sounds like you're really scared of how you're going to support yourself now that you don't have a job anymore. It sounds like you're bored. It sounds like you're lonely. I use this 99.9% in all of the shifts that I do, whether it be at youth clinic, whether it be at the breast health clinic, because this is so powerful, these 3 words. And it doesn't have to be scripted. It doesn't have to be clinical. But Khaled and I, of course, we're married. We use this all the time with each other because sometimes you don't know what to say. And sometimes you're scared to assume how the other person is feeling. But when you mellow it with, it sounds like you had a really rough day at work. Do you want to talk about it? It sounds like you're really frazzled with the kids. Here, why don't I take them for an hour? Suddenly, it softens how you're feeling. It sounds like, for me, that is gold. And it sounds simple, but I really encourage you to use it when you're talking with somebody that you love. Because right away, you can take the emotion out of it and you can put the thought back in it. Another simple way to acknowledge someone is this. Here comes a fast food picture. So I learned this in a parenting book because I'm now having parented 2 toddlers and about to parent another one. A key way to de-escalate a tantrum by a toddler is called the fast food rule. It sounds funny, but what do you do when you pull up, when you order in through, I haven't done this for a long time, but when you order takeout, I guess, and they repeat the order back to you. Okay, so you want a burger, a side of fries, and a large Diet Coke. Do you notice that they always repeat your order back to you before you go to the window where you actually can pay and pick up your food? They always say, so you ordered X, Y, and Z. They always repeat it back to you. So this little rule is called the fast food rule. So anytime you're trying to acknowledge somebody or you feel like the emotions are getting high, you simply repeat back what they just told you. So if it's a child and they say, I want a gummy bear package, or I want some more Smarties, instead of saying, no, you already had some, you just repeat it back to them. You want more Smarties. You want more candy. You want to watch another Paw Patrol, or whatever the case might be. But guess what? You can use this in adults. You really want more time to yourself. You really want a chance to whatever blankety blank it might be. Fill in the blanks. Repeat back whatever the person has just told you is one of the most powerful tools in acknowledging that person. It's that funny analogy of, let's say you take a photo of a group of people and you get shown the photo. Who's the first person you look at? Yourself. We all do it. You always look at yourself first in the photograph. And that's the same thing. When you can have your wants and needs repeated back to you, that's the sweetest sound you're ever going to hear. If you want to acknowledge somebody, try the phrase, it sounds like, finish off that sentence, or repeat back to them exactly what they said and watch their emotions come down. And reminding ourselves that the reason we're talking about acknowledgement in the first place is because when you can acknowledge yourself or someone else, that is the cornerstone to self-awareness. I put in this picture because so many times during this COVID crisis, we don't know what is to come. And that partly speaks to the uncertainty. We don't know what is to come. All of those emotions of fear and anger and irritability might bubble up and be on the surface at some times, or at other times you might feel like you actually are drowning. So there was this great quote that I recently heard by Dr. Vivek Murthy, former Surgeon General, and he said this. He said, remember your anchors. What are your anchors? Your anchors are those things in your life that nobody can take away from you. Your brain, your education, your past experiences, your faith, and most of all, your family and your friends. These are the people that know you even when you don't know yourself. So amidst all of this, it is more important than ever before to connect deeply, to acknowledge one another, and to have that time and that space to really cherish our relationships. Because once this COVID will go, and it will pass, what's going to be left are your anchors. So never forget to cherish them.